Hi, Leonard, and welcome to the Maestro Online.
Hi, Robin.
So, tell me about how you began your musical journey. Did you have musical parents? Were you a musical family, or was there not that influence around you?
My parents are professional musicians, and so I started very early to listen to music. Well, as a baby, but somehow I was always attracted to early music, despite of my parents not being especially early musicians or something. My father is a orchestral musician, a double bass player. My mother is a pianist, and uh, yes, somehow every time I listened to early music, it was something special to me. I started to play the violin at the age of 8, and at the age of 12, I started to play the harpsichord. And only while I was studying in Basel, the harpsichord, I started also to play the organ. And I started to improvise seriously only while studying. Before I was trying a little bit at the keyboard to find ideas for composing in historical styles, but only during my professional studies I started to really improvise.
Okay, so from a young age, did you use the Kodály method or anything? Were you ear training? Were you playing by ear, or was it all about reading the notes at that stage in your life?
Um, for a long time, it was what I took most seriously, I would say, was reading music, and and I was also experimenting to find ideas, but I didn't take that seriously. It was not something I would uh, think of play in public or that I learned to really improvise quite late, and a part of it was indeed ear training in Schola Cantorum Basiliensis. The ear training and similar theoretical subjects also are more taught in a practical way by singing and listening to others who sing and in such working methods.
Brilliant. So with that ear training, with singing first almost as
Yeah.
your development of your ear, um, was that using solfege or was it using absolute notes? Or how was the ear training effective for you?
Um, I was having some kind of, I would say, French school ear training also before going to Schola Cantorum in Basel. I uh, I grew up in the French-speaking part of Switzerland, and there the whole musical training is rather like more or less like in France today. So there was already some solfege, but this didn't help me so much because it was, to me, it was too disconnected to the musical practice I did. In this stage, what helped me a lot was when I had harpsichord lessons in Lausanne. I had basso continuo lessons, and this is I understood very early that this is also a kind of understand composition. It's not only how to play in an ensemble, but it's really a fundament of composition. And in Basel, the ear training and also the lesson of contrapunto alla mente, which is mental counterpoint, actually, one could translate it like that. Uh, this helped me to develop also my improvisation abilities. And to your question, the fundament was a bit singing um, with actually German note names, because there you have the difference of F and Fis. Fis is the F sharp, so it's like one syllable, it's practical to just say one syllable instead of F sharp, or not saying the sharps is not precise. So, well, we used a little bit of this German system, and also solmization, like they taught in the time of Guido Piarezzo.
Brilliant. So, do you think your harpsichord playing made you think of things, and your basso continuo playing made you think of bass lines and notes above? And do you think that changed the way you heard music and the way you thought about music?
Yes, actually, I started with basso continuo already when I started to play the harpsichord at the age of 12, and it was my first fundament of musical understanding. But I understood only later during my studies in Basel that this was indeed the fundament of Baroque music, but before, in the Middle Ages and in the Renaissance, it wasn't. The real fundament was singing, and it was a counterpoint by listening to one voice and understanding what one could do against this voice. This is basically a counterpoint. It's a point against the point. So now I have kind of two kinds of understandings. One is counterpoint, and one is basso continuo, which is based on the bass and on chords.
And when you first began experimenting with things as a harpsichordist, when you began to improvise a little bit, was that just you messing around with patterns that you knew and exploring, or was it something more structured?
It was not structured. It was looking for ideas, for themes for composing. It was not even trying to make a whole piece or something like that.
So it was just an experimentation as a composer, wanted to create something new.
But it's already very precious because many performers don't dare to play basically one note which is not written in the score. And to dare to do that is already a big step to daring to experiment.
And do you think then this experimentation brings more life to you as a performer? Whereas, as you say, most classical performers, you're taught that, that the way the notes are written, their exact length, their exact notes, and then the exact fingering you use has to be absolutely precise, whereas this gives you more freedom. Do you think it makes your performances more imaginative or more spontaneous? Or
I think it definitely helps to the performance. I think it's well, there are some performers who cannot improvise, but who sound still very spontaneous. But I think in most cases, in my case, it really helps to improvise. Like it's like you have to know how to say. If you perform a piece of music, but you have no idea about improvisation, and also not at all about counterpoint and nothing, you have another way of understanding what's happening. So you have probably to write a lot of things into the score, because breathing at some place is something you have to think about. But if you are improvising, you have to create phrases of a certain length by yourself. So the punctuation is not only something which is implied in the score, but something which you have to invent yourself. So breathing at a certain place and understanding the phrase is starting here and ending here is much more fundamental to to the improvisation technique than to the reading technique. So those things which are kind of obvious, like the length of the phrases, where is the biggest tension in the phrase, and where do we go, and what's a surprise, and what's just standard, like a sequence, or this is something which gets much more physical by being able to improvise. So when I became better and better as an improviser, I had to think less and less about those things which are supposed to be, or which are actually obvious and implied in the score. And I also started to write less and less information in the score, even fingerings. It gets like, if you're improvising, you have no paper in front of you, you can also not write a fingering into your improvisation. So everything became more like just in my head, or in my memory, in my muscle memory. And I think it's also worth noting that in the 18th century, when all keyboard players were improvisers, you see in the score, in the surviving scores, which were used for sure, much less information like fingerings. There are some didactical material with fingerings, but the surviving manuscripts of copies of pieces from colleagues, they did, like the Bach pieces were copied by many of his pupils, contain almost no information. They don't even contain all the ornaments they played. So it was really kind of skeleton. And I think if one doesn't have a very deep understanding of the music, it cannot work like that.
So that's a really interesting point, that historically, improvisation and creativity and understanding through improvisation were a really important part of a keyboard player, harpsichord, or wherever it may be. It was a really important part of their journey, part of their learning, and not just part of their learning, but part of their performance. And
Yes.
that isn't taught to classical musicians as much these days. Of course, it's absolutely involved in jazz, etc. Do
Yeah.
you think that that is missing from classical musicians today? Do you think that should be an important element of their study so that they can understand through creativity and become more spontaneous as performers?
Yes, it's still not there enough, but it's coming. I see there are more and more performers who are able to improvise. I think it's still missing in many places. There are some places where, I was lucky. I was studying in places in Basel and later in Groningen, with people who are good at improvising. But I think this kind of places didn't exist at all, like 30 or 40 years ago. And now some of those places exist, but it's still not standard. And I think it has something to do also with early music practice that this is coming back. I think it's very important because it's also about questioning then what early music is about. Because early music was at some point a movement in the already in the 19th century. There were some collectors. They found some old harpsichords which looked nice, and they collected them. But some thought directly they also sound nice, and you have to restore them and to play them. And then there was already performance practice on historical instruments. So this was actually about instruments. This was not even so much about performance style, but it was really about the instruments. But now we have to understand that the highest goal of their teaching was not even to play the repertoire. And that is the highest goal of all classical musicians today. Even those who improvise, it's considered the highest goal to play the most difficult solo music. Like if you have played the Goldberg variations, is a big achievement, or some big Bach fugues at the organ or something. But improvising is like, well, if you're very good, it's nice, but it's in the concert scene, it doesn't have the same importance. And back then, you see, if you had to apply a job as an organist in the 18th century, if you were preparing only some repertoire pieces, nobody would take you for the job, because nobody would ask you to play a repertoire piece. They would give you a fugue theme, they would give you a choral melody, and they would give you a couple of tasks which would make you impossible to prepare anything. And also a basso continuo line, because in big churches there were always cantata performances. So all those tasks were impossible to be prepared. And we have even some descriptions of how well candidates did those tasks. So we know exactly that the highest goal of their teaching was not even to play repertoire, and they played difficult repertoire, but at the end it was about improvising. And even there's only one manuscript, unfortunately, a historical manuscript, which describes how to learn how to improvise. It's by Jakob Adlung. It was he was from the time and region from Bach, and they knew each other also. And Adlung describes what's the 4 steps about learning to play the music. The first one is to learn repertoire, so this is very low level. Then basso continuo, this is 18th century, it's the fundament of music, it's basso continuo. And then it's to play about melodies. Of course, it's Germany, so it's about playing those church songs. And according to Adlung, playing chorals is not very different to basso continuo, because it's very, very related. And then the fourth step, the highest and most important step, is to improvise. And now, if our teaching is about learning how to play repertoire, we are actually learning to learn the first step of, and then we have to question our goals, actually.
Brilliant, brilliant. I love that perspective of learning repertoire is the first step, and leading to creativity is the highest step. I really love that concept. I think it's fantastic. So you've become passionate about early music, and your knowledge and enthusiasm comes through in every chat, and you are a superb improviser. Do you have one improvisation moment of your career that you think is your highlight?
Difficult to say. I've played some concerts which I have enjoyed a lot, but for me, it's often a highlight to when people react to improvisation.
So it's the relationship between you and the audience.
Yes, exactly. Because many people never heard improvisations and in historical styles, so they don't really, they often they don't know exactly how to react, because sometimes it's like for them this old repertoire is like a holy cow, and you cannot just do the same, or but sometimes and sometimes they are still very enthusiastic because you cannot, but actually they see you can still, so it's great, but they didn't expect that. So it's always fascinating. I've actually, my favorite moment, now thinking about it, was a church service in some little church in Switzerland. It was not even a concert or something. I was improvising a fugue at the end of the church service. And then some member of the congregation was kind of almost angry when he came to me and said, what was this Bach fugue you've played, which I don't know? So like, how do you dare to play a Bach fugue, which I don't know? So he had a big knowledge about the Bach repertoire, but there, obviously, he didn't know the piece. And then I said, well, it was an improvisation. And then he didn't say anything for like 3 seconds. It was like something in his brain was stopped. And then he said, then you are Bach. Well, it was something very funny happening there. I really loved this moment. It was the highlight of the day, at least.
I think that's the ultimate compliment. That's brilliant. So I've got a couple more questions for you. So first of all, if you have a day when you're practicing improvisation and you find it difficult to make it flow or be inspired, do you have those days? Are there techniques when you want to practice improvising and for some reason that day it's not happening as well as it usually does? Do you have techniques or devices to overcome those moments?
Those moments are difficult because I also I notice it quite often that that there are days where it's working much better than other days. And then sometimes I tend to think, well, in this case, I just wait for a day where it works better. But then I have also in mind that I have some improvisation concerts planned. And there I cannot just do them the next day. So it has to work at some moment, and then I try to if I decide to really go into detail when it doesn't work well, I try to practice little bits because I understand now that often it's about details where some part of my brain says something different than another part of the brain. So I decide to make little phrases, like often it's about choral melodies where one phrase somehow I cannot harmonize it anymore, or similar things. So I spot very fast that it's really about 2 or 3 notes which are creating a problem to me, and then I try to get it more simple until I get the real essence of the counterpoint possibilities, and then I practice about those details. And yeah, I think it's always good to remember that it's very important in practicing improvisation that even if the goal is to make a very long and complex piece, that little moments are very important, and that it's good also, like if you improvise a fugue, for instance, you are very good to make in making a beginning, but there are some kinds of modulation which don't work well. It can be a good exercise to start in the middle of the fugue. You imagine the fugue is in C major, but this part is in A minor. And then you start in the part in A minor, somewhere in the middle, and try to go back to the main key. But having already in mind, like practicing repertoire, if you practice the first page of the piece and it's going very well, the next day maybe you start directly at the second page. But now it's improvised, so you don't have pages anymore, but the system is the same. So I use really kind of repertoire practicing techniques.
Brilliant. So you recommend very structured practice.
Yes.
So final question. Let's imagine I was somebody who really appreciated early music or any style of music really, and I wanted to start improvising. And I felt that the task was perhaps slightly overwhelming. I was like, how can I sound like this? How can I do it? Where where should I start, and what kind of advice would you give me?
My advice is to do structured practicing, especially at the beginning, because I've noticed very often that those people who are most afraid are afraid because somebody tells them to just try, just follow what you feel. But if there is nothing in the muscle memory of the person, it's terrible to say that. It's it's like you want to learn a foreign language, you don't know a word, and then somebody tells you just go by your feeling, try to say something. It's not working like that. So it's better to say, here are your first two words in this language. You cannot make a speech out of it, but remember them. And improvising is the same. I would really start with maybe explaining a triad and then moving the same triads all in the same keyboard, and then going by very little steps. And usually nobody is really overwhelmed by that.
That's fantastic. I really appreciate that advice. That's very sound advice. Leonard, thank you very much for this interview, and thank you very much for your amazing masterclasses.
Thank you.